Good morning, Dr. Brian Peters. How are you this
Good
morning?
morning. I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. The world famous Dr. Brian Peters, the doctor of engagement, who literally has a PhD in organizational industrial psychology. Today, we are going to be moving, as we discussed, into more of sort of a brass tacks. How do you do this um, standpoint? We've outlined some central concepts in our introductory episodes of the future engagement. Like, what does leadership mean? Are you interested in leadership styles or leadership behaviors? We've decided that we're gravitating towards leadership behaviors because we want to see what people do when they're in front of other people because it's so important and it's measurable. And the importance of communication and collaboration and the culture of support that you give to people. These are very important things. And now we're moving into phase two, where we're looking at engagement in a more granular view, looking at specific things that can be done to make companies more profitable uh, and to increase the knowledge of people that are working for companies about what the company does, how they do it, how they become more profitable, and what their specific role is, how they are impacting these business drivers, and how they can be or should be supporting other people around them. So that's what we're embarking on now in phase two. And I'm going to let you do most of the talking. I'm going to shut up after just a second. But I had a perfect segue to today's episode from a conversation that I had with a survey research and feedback group that we um, work with. And we were discussing the fact that we have our own engagement research software platform. Now, this is not an infomercial. This is, information that people can use to improve engagement. But I do think that we are allowed to say that we have our own engagement improvement software platform for research purposes, and it's called Engagement View. So we were discussing, and if anyone, of course, obviously wants any information about the fact that we have our own software program and, what can we do for you, they're more than free to contact us because that's what we do after all, right? But we were discussing this tool and the implications of an upcoming project with a very large survey research group of people yesterday. And one of the questions that came up was, what is the importance of genuine engagement when you're looking at ways to improve business execution? And by business execution, we mean the nuts and bolts. How do you improve people's specific knowledge of the job that they're in, how to become better at the job that they're in, how to understand how they make an impact in every area of the business? What does engagement mean to business execution? And one of the fellows on the call yesterday, who was the former CEO of a very large enterprise, said the answer is simple. You simply cannot improve business execution unless you improve engagement. You can't. The two are inextricably related. That if your goal is to improve business execution, improve the way that you do in business, the way you interact with customers, you cannot do that without engagement. And what engagement means is how the corporation interacts with and the culture that it has established for interacting with and communicating with every single person that works for the organization. Not just some, not just the boardroom, not just the leaders, not just the management, but every single person that works for the organization. If you don't do that, you're not going to improve business execution, was a statement that he made on the call yesterday. And then, of course, attached to that is the certainty that if you do not improve engagement with everyone across the board, you're not you're not going to be improving business execution, but you're also not going to be improving engagement with your customers. And engagement with your customers is where most of the downstream success of business execution comes from. That's how you retain customers. That's how you get more customers. That's how you get customers to spend more money. So in a very short period of time, we sort of narrowed in at the CEO level on the idea that without greater engagement and understanding why you might not have as much engagement as you would like and what to do about that, you are never going to improve business execution. Therefore, engagement isn't just something fluffy and fun that we talk about. Engagement is key to everything. So that is what you did a lot of your doctoral research on. So having said that, let's spend the rest of this particular episode talking about that. When you work with companies and you work with organizations and you work with teams and they say, okay, let me get this straight. You're saying that if we want to improve revenue, cost management, business execution overall, we cannot do so without improving our level of engagement. Teach us. Where do you start in the process of helping companies say, we get it now, we need to improve engagement, not just give lip service to it, but improve it at the process level, at the granular level, at the nuts and bolts level. Show us what to do. Where do you start with the people that you work with?
Yeah, so I think that essentially you need to understand where people currently are, right? You need to understand the culture of the organization, what processes they have in place. I think you need to talk with employees, get feedback, look at everything. I think it's important to look at everything from, job descriptions to, KPIs to how meetings are run to, any programs that are there to help include employees and have their voices heard, and meet with leadership, but again, also meet with individual employees, because sometimes, you have some really great leaders that might be very in tune with what's going on with the organization or with their employees. But sometimes employees either don't feel comfortable, or there is a big fear I see out there that employees are worried about if they complain or if they go to their manager with issues, that's going to look bad on them and their job's at risk. There seems to be a lot of workplace trauma out there I've experienced where employees are really worried about their job. And so sometimes they just keep quiet. Even in organizations where that shouldn't be an issue. I've run an organization where no one was ever at risk, but there was still this trauma. Everybody could bring up their ideas, but some people still had a problem with that. So anyway, so I think you just have to, for me, it's really trying to understand where we're currently at, because unless you understand all of that, you can't identify the gaps and you can't start to solution anything, right? You don't know where to take, where to take the efforts, or where to put your effort into.
So there are any number of ways, I guess, to skin a cat, as they say, and we can start, I guess, with several different entree points. But let me tell you about a very interesting conversation that was relayed to me about the importance of talking to your people before you can even possibly imagine growing. So on our team, on this survey and feedback consulting team that I was speaking of, we have this phenomenal woman on the team who is an expert in everything that relates to corporate tax. And she recounted a story in which she had lunch with, I guess, one of the most famous entrepreneurs in the Raleigh Research Triangle area, founder of numerous companies that are household names around here. And she had lunch with the guy, and she was asking him, so what happens if you just find yourself in a position where you can't grow? And say you're stuck at 15 million, and you're saying to yourself, I don't want to be stuck at 15 million, forever. Seems we've hit the wall. I would like to double our revenue, double the size of our company in the next 3 to 5 years, say, maybe even sooner than that. What do I do? What do I do if I found myself stuck and I just can't seem to grow? And we've hit that roadblock. She said that this nationally famous, maybe even world famous company builder told her there are only a few things that you can do when you find yourself in that spot. And this is what you have to do. You have to talk to all of your employees, not some of them, but you have to talk to all of them. And you have to ask them, what do you do? One, why do you do it that way? 2, 3, why do you do it that way and not another way? 4, where do you see areas for improvement at your company that perhaps no one has ever asked you to explain? What do you think we can do to improve cost containment, revenue, better teamwork, collaboration, anything that can be improved? And finally, 5, how do you think we should do that? 5 things. What do you do? Why do you do it that way? Why do you do it that way and not another way? What are your best areas for improvement? And how do you think that we should do that? She says that he told her, you have to ask those questions. You have to ask those questions of everybody. And you have to use that information to look for common threads and do what your people are telling you to do because they see what's going wrong and you don't. That is the only thing that you can do to grow. Period and end of sentence. And then, of course, she made the observation. She was like, well, David, after all, that's what our software tool engagement view does, right? It figures out the answers to those 5 questions. And I was like, exactly. And her face lit up and said, well, looks like we're in a good place then. But from that vantage point, it looks like those 5 pillars are pretty specific. Do you agree with this world famous company builder that those are the 5 pillars of improving growth, that you have to ask your people all of those questions, and that is the key to engagement? is that part of your observation too, as you worked your way through obtaining your doctorate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those questions, doing that does go a long way to keeping people engaged, right? Engagement is a multifaceted concept, right? So there's lots of different things. But I think starting there, especially if you want to grow your business, is really good. I do think that you have to, perhaps caveat some of that stuff when you're having conversations with expectation management, right? So like when you're getting all this feedback. So one of the problems that I see in organizations is you get all this feedback and you either some of the things you just can't do, right? For whatever reason, resource issues, time, whatever. Like there's reasons that you can't do certain, feedback. Or there's certain things that just take longer to do. And why I point that out is because I've experienced this myself, where you get this feedback from people. You're like, yeah, those are great ideas. We need to implement these things. And then if it doesn't happen right away, sometimes as a business owner, like or a CEO or whatever, your time horizon is very long. So you might be saying, yes, this would be good. We can implement. It's going to take 12 to 18 months. Or this person's thinking it should be done in the next 2 months, right? And so you have to manage that. So it's not enough to just have the conversations. You have to also manage expectations, right? Like if you can't do something, I'm a big proponent of the explaining why you can't do something. So again, let's say when I was running a small company, people would have all these ideas, but we had financial restrictions. Like there's certain things I just can't afford to do. And so I just have that conversation. Like, I love that idea. We're not in a place to do that. Maybe we put that and table it or whatever, and we'll get back to it if we can financially afford to do that, right? So again, and why I bring that up is because I think if you don't manage those expectations, you can have all the conversations in the world, but you'll still end up with disengaged people because they still don't feel like you're listening. They feel like it's just an exercise to say that you listened to them, or you gave them, it's like it's giving them a voice, but not really listening to what they have to say, right? The other thing too is I always tell leaders to look for the easy wins in there so that you can show progress immediately. And that's, again, part of that manage expectations. So if you get all this feedback in, you're not going to be able to do everything. Pick the couple of things that you can kind of trickle out that you can do that shows, hey, I heard you and we're doing these things. And that'll also keep people engaged, and we'll keep that feedback loop coming, right? Because now they're like, oh, I said that, they took action. Next time I have an idea, I'm going to bring it up. So I know that's, a long-winded answer to your question. I think, yes, those questions are great. I do think that you have to manage that a certain way to make sure that you don't still create disengaged workers.
Okay, so that's great. So let's spend the rest of the time on this conversation putting a bow on what you just said. Okay, because I see a lot of complex intersections of different concepts there. One is that I know for a fact that a lot of people who feel extremely disengaged, when I ask them to describe how they feel at work, this could be corporate work, government work, you name it, the common thing that I feel, even among people who are on the leadership and the management team, or leadership at a certain level and then management at a certain level, is I feel like I'm in a black hole. I feel like I've just been dropped down into the bottom of a deep, dark well. People are making decisions above me. It hasn't been communicated with me. I have no idea why they just made the decision that they did. It's not based on any evidence that I know of. They don't seem to have ever interacted with a client or customer in their entire lives. What they just suggested goes completely against the grain of what our customers are asking us for. It's suicide to do what they just asked us to do. I don't know why they didn't ask us, people who are actually interacting with the customer, if that was a good idea before they decided to do it. And they still haven't asked us what we think. That's a very, 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 very common description that I hear from people. And I also hear people talk about quiet quitting. They're like, I'm currently looking for a new job because I just hate it here. And again, and I've seen this at a gigantic research institutions too. You just changed scientific policy or the way we go about procedure, and you haven't asked a single person who's actually on the research team anything about this before you decide to make these changes, and you don't know diddly squat. So I've seen it with my own eyeballs in pretty extreme circumstances. Just didn't make any sense whatsoever. So I hear that a lot, and people are like, "Well, I'm just going to quit." So it seems to me that what you're talking about, small wins, could also involve some sort of daily communication with people, letting them know what's going on and why it's going on and what improvements have been made. That seems to be what people are looking for, is just keep us in the loop. Explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, when we get a chance to give our feedback, what you plan to do with our feedback, and what's going on right now. It's that simple. It just seems to be what the people are asking for that are quiet quitting. Can you give, from your wisdom, a scenario in which you're trying to change something or do something as a leader, and you're going to communicate with the team, the boots on the ground, but you're not going to over communicate? Where is that Goldilocks sweet spot in which you are communicating with people enough about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and getting their feedback and letting them know what's going on to make them feel that they're involved so they don't quit, without over communicating? Give me one good scenario of where you have seen that type of process put into place. What did successful companies do, and how did they do it in a scenario where you had to keep your employee base informed of what was going on?
So I think it depends on the company, right? So like I've worked for companies that put out a ton of communication and it's overload, right? Where you get tons of emails. I think it's really important for companies to have an overall communication strategy so that they don't overwhelm people, because it ends up being like, we get so many spam calls nowadays that most people don't answer when they don't know the number, right? Because they're like, I don't want to deal with spam. It's the same thing with emails, right? If you don't have a communication strategy, people just start to ignore that stuff. I worked for a company where I really liked their cadence. So there was a weekly newsletter that went out from the president, from the voice of the president. It wasn't necessarily written by the president, but it would update all of the organization. Now, this was a small company, about 220, 230 people. But it would go out to the entire company, and it would have key KPIs that were measured again. So it would talk about certain things like, customer satisfaction score, a few other things. And then it would update them on different initiatives. There'd be like an HR section to, remind them about different, open enrollment's coming up, things like that. But there were different sections that would do, like, if we have any initiatives or there's any, the direction of the company, the vision of the company. And so that worked really, really well. And then on top of that, we would do quarterly all hands, where we would go through, the direction of the organization, what we're trying, feedback that we've gotten. We also would get feedback daily from this program that would send out a daily question, basically, for people to give feedbacks, and it could be anonymous. So we were taking the data we got in. We were then, communicating in the weekly newsletter and the quarterly all hands. Hey, we've heard you. These are things that we're doing. Here are some successes. Here are some failures, things like that, to really have a transparent culture. And I really like that. And I actually took some of those ideas. And when I was running a small company, I did similar things, where we were very, very transparent. So much so that we had a fractional CFO did not like that I shared our financial information with everybody, but I was just very transparent and wanted people to feel like they were part of the company. So again, it kind of depends on the culture of the organization, but I would say, weekly can be great. If you have a lot of other communications just necessary, then maybe you do that monthly. But it's important to be consistent and people know what to expect.
That's great. So let's conclude this episode with some key takeaways, some homework assignments that you can give to listeners. And before I'll say that, everyone knows that internal communications is huge. I mean, most organizations try to find the best expert that they can to run internal communications, because external communications obviously to customers is really important, but having internal communications among the team to sustain the culture, the level of engagement, enthusiasm, pride in the organization. I would say pride in the organization, the feeling of being part of a great team, the feeling of being part of something important, understanding what's going on, what's expected, maintaining the culture that you've worked so hard. These are extremely important goals of whoever's in charge of internal communications, right? So, having said what you just said, could you give listeners who are either in charge of internal communications or part of the internal communications team, or anyone else in a leadership or management position who's trying to manage expectations, just 4 or 5 things that they could think about today of new things that they could do to create a better and a simpler and a more efficient process of creating that awareness and knowledge and feedback loop for people without overwhelming them. Just a couple of simple, 2, 3, or 4, 5 at the most, suggestions of what they could do now if they were to get out an index card and say, okay, well, I'm going to try this. Just 3 or 4 ideas that you think would be good things for people to work on to create a more streamlined process of internal communication.
So I think organizations need to, first and foremost, they needed to develop a communication strategy, right? And you can iterate. It doesn't need to be perfect out the gate. I see too often that organizations just go out and just start sort of communicate, like just start sending newsletters or emails or whatever without putting any thought behind the content. How much are you going to put in there? To your point, so that it's not overwhelming. How often are you going to communicate? Looking at, okay, well, how much communication are they getting on a regular basis? Okay, we don't want to overload them. So if they're getting 50, 60, 70 emails a day, we don't want to do a daily email. We want to do a weekly or monthly. What day of the week do we want to do it? Looking at shifts, if people are working split shifts, front half, back half sort of thing, like how do we want to communicate that so everybody sees it? That kind of stuff. So just really just going through the exercise of just putting some thought into how you want to communicate at a corporate level, like an entire organization level. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong. I mean, I guess if you only communicate maybe quarterly or annually, that's probably the wrong way to do it. Because I think you probably have more updates than maybe you think. So sit down, put some thought into it, engage with employees to understand kind of what they want to hear. Like we're actually, the company I work for, we're actually going through this exercise right now. We're doing focus groups to understand from employees, like, what do they even want to hear, right? Like what would they like to know more about? What is important to them? So yes, you have things that you want to get out for the organization because there's just communication that you need, right? Again, if you look at like HR stuff, hey, open enrollment's coming, like that kind of stuff is necessary and important. The direction of the company, where it's going, all that kind of stuff's important. But really listen to the employees and what do they want to know more about? What are they interested in with the organization, and try to tailor it that way. I think it's a really good exercise to take. I've seen managers get away from like daily stand-ups, which I think is unfortunate. Now, that is not appropriate for maybe every type of business, but I think a lot could do with either a daily email from your not corporate, but each leadership team, where it's just talking about what is any important notes, and maybe it doesn't need to be daily, maybe it's weekly. But when I worked for Amazon, every shift had a daily stand up where they would go and they would talk about safety, any updates. They would do little stretches and things like that. And I think that's actually a really great practice. And again, if daily doesn't make sense for your organization or for your team, maybe it's a weekly thing. But just connecting with the team via email, Slack or Teams or something, to be like, hey, here's what's going on for the day. Here's the things I need to make you aware of. Hope everybody has a great day. Reach out, whatever, just to keep that connection going. I think it's something that's lost that I don't see enough organizations do, and I think that would be really useful. So I think just doing a couple of those things, as well as, we've talked about this before, but like leaders should be doing one-on-ones and team meetings. Like those things are important, and you can do updates in there. But again, I think taking the time, understanding the overall communication strategy as an organization, listening to employees, understanding what they care about, so you can tailor the communication to those things, because you'll get more engagement with the communication, and then having leaders sort of pass down things either daily or weekly to their team, I think would be a great start for a lot of organizations.
Before we go, I just want to ask your opinion on this. I don't know the right. I don't know the right or wrong answer, so that's obviously the reason why I'm asking you. But I personally, myself, I have a very driven personality. I'm, a high D, so to speak. And I just enjoy just really short 5-10 minute, calls with the team, just to kind of check in with people or people who are important on the teams that I'm involved with, and just say, what's going on today? Any improvement from what we talked about yesterday? Great. So how are you going to approach that today? Fine. Well, that sounds cool. Well, let's check in tomorrow and see what's going on. I just really like to do that because it just feels good. I start to lose momentum with any team that I'm working on if it goes longer than 2 days. It's just 2 days is a really long time for me. It feels like years, in David years. It's just, or in David time, it's just like, the sales cycle is slowing down. That's after 2 days of silence. So I just like to have a beat going where what's going on every single day, but only for 5 minutes, just a quick update. And then I've also run into situations where, people that I have to manage, and check in with, say, even on sales teams, kind of give I just like to be left alone and kind of do what I feel like doing for the rest of the week, and kind of give a report at the end of the week. I'm like, no, I'm just not interested in that. That's like asking me, if we're on a sales team, if you want me to check in with you 10 years from now. It's like a really long time. So, am I abnormal in wanting that level of, daily check-in, just at least 5 minutes to see what's going on, to keep up the momentum? Is that, right, or is that too much?
I don't think it's as simple as a right or wrong, like you were saying before. I think the risk that you take, the more, kind of forcing that meeting, is it feeling like micromanagement, right? So it kind of just depends on how you approach it, right? If it's just like, hey, just want to check in, see how things are going. Do you need anything from me? Whatever. That probably doesn't feel like micromanagement. If it's constantly, well, where are you at with this? Where are you at with that? And you're not giving them an opportunity to actually work on the things to give you a progress report, that's going to feel like micromanagement, and it's going to create disengagement. So it's really not a matter of like, is it a problem to meet daily? It's a matter of like how those meetings go. I do think it's good for leaders just to make sure that I think a check-in is good. Now, depending, especially with remote work, right? One of the biggest issues with remote work is loneliness, right? Where people just feel disconnected from others because you don't see them on a regular basis. So whether that's a phone call, jumping on a video chat, or just pinging somebody in a messenger like Teams, Slack, whatever, Google Chat, whatever the company uses, I think goes a long way to helping people feel more connected and feeling less lonely. And again, it can just simply be like, hey, just checking in, see how you're doing today. Do you need anything from me? How can I help? Whatever sort of thing. I think it's a really good practice to have. I talk to my team on a regular basis, but I only did like official meetings. I would typically when I manage teams, I do official meetings. I usually do one weekly whole team meeting and then one weekly one-on-one. But I would talk with them throughout, basically every day, just checking in like, hey, how are things going? Do you need anything? So again, not a simple answer because none of these things are simple. So again, I think checking in is great. I think that you wanting a 5-minute call, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's a matter of the content of that call. If people feel like you're micromanaging, that's going to cause problems.
Well, okay, so two things I would say. I'm going to get to what I think is the most important thing second, and that would be what I call the daily pep talk. But I do think that one of the fears that I have is sometimes if you trust people, well, I'm just going to leave you alone. I don't want to micromanage you. Just keep on doing what you're doing. Sometimes you can find out that people are kind of punching the clock, so to speak. And yeah, they're doing something every day and they're putting in their time, but what they're doing is not working. So, sometimes like the goal of like the manager or, the person who's guiding the activity isn't a helpful, friendly way to say, well, if this process is not working, well, why don't we try something else? And so my inherent fear is if you let things go on too long, you find out when things are really not working and need to be tweaked too late. That would be why I like to check in more often than not. And the second thing is that, I'm a big believer in just like the early morning, jolt of coffee pep talk. I'm saying that because people have told me that I have way too much pep for my own good, and I need to give some of that pep away. So, and I've noticed that a lot of people do seem to, have a personality where they're like, oh, it's another day, and I didn't really achieve my goals yesterday, and I'm feeling, a little disappointed, and and I found out that I'm pretty good at helping people start off the day by going, yeah, 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 you can do it, and kind of pumps them up, and I feel that's kind of a useful thing for people like me to do. But is that too much? I mean, do people appreciate that, or most people like stop it with the pep talk already? I just want to do my job. Like, where do you draw that line?
So I think you got to know your team. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about what you just mentioned. So one, when you talk about letting things go too long, I agree. If you take like a laissez-faire approach to leadership, things can get out of hand. I don't think you need a daily check-in asking a status report on things to catch things early. I think a weekly team meeting and a weekly one-on-one will accomplish that. And study after study shows that autonomy, providing autonomy to employees has a large effect on engagement. Again, when you take that autonomy away, when they feel like they're micromanaged, you get disengaged workers. So I agree with you that you have to identify things. And if you're looking at like remote workers, they punching the clock, in my opinion, the onus is on the manager to make sure they're giving them enough tasks. They're giving them enough things to do where that's not an issue. I don't worry so much as a manager whether or not they're working 4 hours, 8 hours, 16 hours, whatever. I worry about what the output is. Are the outputs what I need from them? And if the answer to that is no, we need to have a conversation around that. Now, if my expectations are too high, I'm open to that conversation, right? So if I'm expecting outputs that are just unrealistic, completely open to that conversation and adjusting. But if I'm giving, hey, this is the things that I need done, and that's not getting done, whether you spent 4 hours on it, 8 hours on it, whatever, I'm not as concerned about that. I'm more concerned about what you give me. So I'm paying for expertise, right? So if I'm hiring somebody, if I give them a task that, I think is going to take a whole day and it takes them 2 hours, I don't necessarily care about that because I'm getting what I need out of them, right? That's just my personal opinion on that. But I do think that finding ways to provide autonomy is very, very important if you want to keep people engaged. As far as the pep talk, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but what I tell managers is it's really important to know your team. I always, the coaching I usually give managers is, the saying like do unto others as you'd have them do unto you is a great starting point when you're working with people because you don't know them.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you want to switch that to basically treat others the way that they want to be treated, right? Not the way that you want to be treated, because everybody's communication style is different. Some people, they want you to be very direct. They want you to be, that pep talk. Other people want to be more, hands off and just, hey, I'm busy. I got meetings back to back to back. I don't need another meeting. Right. So you got to get to know your team. But I think you start with what you're saying, right? Is like you do start with the, daily pep talk. And if you realize that somebody's just not feeling it, maybe you back off of that. Right. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I also think like what you need as a manager is also important. So if you feel like you need to connect with people on a daily basis, I think that's fine. Maybe you just tailor it to where not everybody wants a call. Maybe it's just a text message or a Slack message or whatever, right? And you can kind of tailor it. So, So again, I think like everything we talk about, there's multiple approaches you can take because people are very different, and you have to take that into account whenever you're kind of developing strategies.
Cool. I'm going to ask one more thing because I know that every good leader, every good manager out there knows exactly what I'm about to talk about, and that is trusting your instincts. So probably the entire time we've been talking, every good leader and manager out there has been going, yeah, but I have my instincts too, pal. And this is what I mean by that. In terms of giving autonomy, say, for example, I know a lot of rock star salespeople. They're just phenomenal, that I love to death. So say, I'm working with and talking about a particular rock star saleswoman on my team. I don't have to check in with that person. I can check in like Monday morning. I can check in Friday. And I can go, so how many things have you closed this week? 12. Okay, great, cool. So well, hope you have a great weekend. Let's catch up Monday. I don't need to ask her anything, right? It's just like, wow, you're outperforming everybody. This is awesome. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. There's not a whole lot of communication except for just short, hey, can you fill me in? Like, who are you going to call this week? Yada, yada. But then there are other people, you have an instinct that they're giving you all the smiles and the enthusiasm and yeah, everything's great, man. I'm just, doing it. I'm just like working it, man. I'm rocking it to the core, all the buzzwords. But something's wrong. You're like, well, you're saying it, but there's something in my instincts that I don't quite believe what you're saying. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. And you just kind of know that someone's blowing smoke, It's kind of hard to put your finger on it. But as a manager or as a leader, you have this instinctual thing. I don't trust that. I mean, I trusted the other woman that I'm talking about, like to the core, but I don't trust what I'm being told right now. I mean, I'm sure that you've had those instinctual moments too, right? So if you pick up those instinctual vibes where the person is saying all of the right things, and you know that you would be an idiot not to do a deeper dive or not to do a little bit more micromanaging, even though you don't want to, how do you approach that? I mean, it's a pretty tricky thing to deal with. And I know that most leaders and managers struggle with that. If that makes any sense, and please tell me if it does, how do you deal with those tricky situations in which there are some people that are saying all the right things, but you actually know they could use a little bit of micromanagement?
So I think autonomy has to be appropriate to the individual, to their skill level, to what they can do, right? So I think if people show that they can't be trusted to do certain things, yes, there's a little bit less autonomy, but you should build up to more and more autonomy, right? So it should be a coaching conversation. I do think at times it's good to trust your gut. The problem with your gut is it is influenced a lot by your own biases. And so you also need to think objectively to make sure that you're being fair to that person, right? So yes, I do think, yes, trust your instincts a little bit, but also you need to think about it to make sure that you're being fair as you can to that person and not letting your biases influence, how you're approaching that. So I think, again, it goes to looking at, we talk about this, like, how do you know? So, and you talk about it's harder to know those things, but you got to ask that, like, how do you know that they're not doing these things? Well, is their output not what it needs to be, right? Or they're not making enough sales, or they're not doing whatever, depending on the job. And then you could say, okay, I'm not getting what I need out of that person. And then, so yeah, maybe you need more regular check-ins. Maybe it's not a daily check-in. Maybe it's, they're using a CRM and you're just, you're in the background looking at the data on a daily basis and seeing the activities. And so the person doesn't feel like you're over their shoulder, but you are feeling confident that you can assess what's going on. And then in your weekly meeting, you talk about that, right? Or maybe because they're not performing well, you do meet more regularly, but the hope is to coach them to a point where you don't need to, right? Because as a leader, it makes your job easier too. If you can give them more autonomy, you can get freed up to do other things. So I think it's okay if you have somebody who's underperforming to take different approach and maybe meet a little bit more often, but you need to work towards giving them greater autonomy if you want to keep them engaged long term. And then you also have to recognize when somebody's just not a right fit for the role, right? And so maybe they're never going to get there. And that's when you need to have that conversation of either moving them to a different role or moving them out of the organization and bringing somebody else that's a right fit. So yeah, I think temporary, pulling back autonomy is okay. But I still think, again, you need to work to giving as much as is appropriate for that person's capabilities.
Awesome. Well, let's have a special segment real soon in which we talk about the foundations of coaching. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Brian Peters, for another fabulous talk. I think your insights once again have been spot on. It's been great to talk to you. Thanks again, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week and weekend.
Thank you. You too. Talk to you soon.
Sir.
Thank you for checking out this episode of the Science of Engagement podcast. Let's keep the conversation going down in the comments. If you like this episode, please hit the like button and be sure to hit subscribe to stay up to date on the science of keeping your people engaged without the fluff. See you in the next one.